From the campus of Volunteer State Community College, this is Inside Politics.
Hi, and welcome to Inside Politics. I'm Nancy Hauskins. This spring's legislative session is in full gear now, and while balancing the state budget is the largest topic, there are many other important pieces of legislation on this year's agenda. Joining us today to talk about that and so much more is State Senator Diane Black of the 18th District, which includes Robertson and Sumner counties. Thank you for being here with us again.
Well, you're very welcome. It's my pleasure.
Well, first, let's get right down to business. We got a lot to talk about. First, let's start with this special session that Governor Bredesen called early in January for education. Two main topics, obviously, being K through 12 education and higher education. What were the main components that you saw in the K through 12?
Well, first I want to make sure that people understand, because I've got so much feedback that we got in there and all of a sudden we passed this legislation with only a week to look at it, and how could we ever make those decisions? And these were not new topics. These were topics that had been talked about for a number of years, going all the way back to the Alexander administration. And there was also a group called SCORE that was headed by Senator Frist. It was educators, parents, business people that had been studying this issue for about 18 months. And so many of the things that we did do in this session had to do with the SCORE and the recommendations from SCORE. I think the top two things, Nancy, that at least I felt that came out of this was, one, using what we have as the Tennessee value-added scores, where we take the TCAP scores and through some statistical analysis, we can tell whether a child is progressing year to year. And we haven't really used those scores. We've been doing them for 20 years. They've kind of been in a lockbox, so to speak. Some of the teachers never even really get to see them or understand those scores. And so this was a mechanism to take those scores out of those lockboxes and start to actually use them. One of the real controversies is how do you use that in a manner in which you can tell whether a teacher is progressing with their students, and using that as part of their evaluation. And we came to the consensus that about 35% of the teachers' evaluation would be used using those scores. And I'll talk about just in a little bit here of some of the things I heard back from the teachers. The second part of that legislation that was so important to me is we have a number of schools in this state that are failing schools. And they haven't just failed 1 year or 2 years. We have schools that have been failing for 10 years. And there were some mechanisms in this legislation to say, okay, we're going to take this really very seriously. And we've got some procedures that we're going to use to take over these schools to make sure that we don't have children that are forced to go to schools that are failing.
Since you brought it up, what are you hearing from teachers? I know we've heard things in the news and on the street, but what are you hearing?
Well, I heard two things from the teachers. They said, if you're going to use our TCAPs, we have to make it more relevant to the student and also to the families, because they tell me that parents will say to their children, oh, don't worry about that because it doesn't count for anything for you. It may count for something for your teacher in judging your teachers, evaluating your teacher and whether they're effective, but it really doesn't count for you. And what we wanted to do was make those tests relevant. So I actually have a bill that says that the scores from those TCAPs would be part of the child's end of the year grade. And this would give them an incentive both for the parent and the student to make sure that they're doing the best they can do on those tests. The second thing is that I heard teachers say those tests are given too early in the year. They're given in March, and we still have all the rest of March, if they're given in the beginning of March, all the rest of March and April and part of May, that we lose instructional time. And so I have another bill that says that they would not give these tests until the 1st of April, which give them another four weeks of instructional time. Both of those bills are moving through the process. I'm actually going to be meeting with the Commissioner of Education this upcoming week and talking about those bills and how we might be able to initiate those.
I know there's been some conversation, some fear among teachers that if they're in very high-performing schools, they're not going to see much of a hike in the scores, so that they may not get their bonuses or get their raises.
And I want to be clear on this too, is that those evaluations will not be used to dismiss any teachers. They still also have a process by which they can be heard if they feel that something has been done unfairly. There are processes out there for them to go through, a due process to make their case. And I know that there's this argument that there is a glass ceiling that you reach with students and you can't take them any higher. Dr. Sanders, who developed the TVAS, the Tennessee Value Added System, says that's not true. I've sat around the table with him before, and he has been able to show me where that is not true in most of the cases, although I will say to you that I'm still a little skeptical on that end, and I will tell the teachers that that is a skepticism that I still have. We're waiting to hear back from an advisory committee who were given all of these directives on coming back and actually putting some meat on the bone. We gave them a skeleton and they put the meat on the bone. So I'll be very interested to see what they have to say. That advisory committee will then pass that information on to the Board of Education. The Board of Education will make the final determination.
You said some of these issues have been on the table for a while, but would we be where we are today if not for the possibility of the federal grant money called Race to the Top?
Well, I think there's one of those perfect storms where we have had this group called SCORE for the last 18 months that have been studying this issue. The governor has always been very interested in education. He's talked about it for a number of years, and this was his year to do something with education in a very large way. And then you couple with that the whole thing from Race to the Top, and I think that perfect storm came together to make us actually come and do something that many people have felt we needed to do for quite some time. So these issues are not new issues, and they haven't, it wasn't like we just one day decided to pick this up and do it. It has been very much studied.
Now, if Tennessee is unable to get that grant money, since I understand we don't know yet, will we be able to fund the changes that you all have implemented?
Well, a part of those changes really don't even cost anything, and so there are a number of pieces of that. For instance, the piece where you have a failing school and you can go in and take over that failing school, we already have some provisions in our code that the Board of Education could do that. But this takes it a step further in that not only can the Board of Education do that, but they can contract out with a separate entity like the Gates Foundation to come in and help to run that school and get it back on the right track so that it can be given back to the district. So, of course, if you were to contract that out, there are funds that would be used for that school anyway. Obviously, that school had funds that it was operating on. Those funds can be used for that as well. So there are pieces of this that would not have cost any money to begin with. But there are other pieces of it that just would not happen. Actually, one of those is that we wanted a pot of money to allow teachers who are either having challenges in meeting their the needs of their students. If, let's say, they're not doing well on reading, so that they can apply to go into those classes that might allow them to get a little more education of how they can boost themselves. We want to help the teachers that are having those challenges. On the other end, we want to say thank you to the teachers that are doing really well. And they can apply for grants for things like getting their national certification. Now, that's a pot of money of $60 million that we were going to set aside. If the money doesn't come down from the federal government, it's unlikely that that pot of money will occur. So you see, there are some things in there that will cost money, and if we're not able to get the money from the federal government, those pieces will not actually take place.
Right. Well, let's move on to higher education. The special session's creating some changes in higher education as well. One of the major issues discussed was the transferability of credits from school to school, especially transferring from a community college like Volunteer State to a four-year school. Can you give us some details on how that has changed?
This is another issue that has been talked about for a long time. As a matter of fact, we went back and looked, and there was a directive given to THAC, the Tennessee Higher Education Commission, back in the year of 2000 to have a plan to come back to do that, to make it easier for students to be able to matriculate through the entire system from the community colleges up to the four-year schools. And that was never done. And so this is, again, not a new subject that's been talked about. Making it consistent across the whole system. So if you take English 101, it doesn't matter whether you take it at Vol State or if you take it at Roane State. If you do take 101, you can transfer it into UT or Memphis or wherever. It just makes the whole system for the students a whole lot more easy to move through, which again will show that we'll have a higher percentage of graduates, because people get very discouraged. If you take English 101 and then you go to transfer and they say, oh, well, sorry, that's not like our English 101, and you have to take that over again. students will get very discouraged on that, and they'll say, you know, this is just not worth it. I'm not sure I can reach my goal. I'm working, I have a family. And so this just makes it much easier for the student to be able to transfer and to be able to go on, and there's consistency across the whole system.
Yeah, a little less daunting.